This Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch, we have a very special edition of live NFL trivia. It's our first ever jackpot game, which means we're giving away over $150 in cash prizes to whoever wins, and that number could potentially go up. It's our biggest game yet, so you won't want to miss it. Come on over and test your football knowledge to win our largest cash prize yet. And now, on with our feature presentation. Imagine that you're a free agent. Your contract is up, and now it's your turn to sign with any team in the league, and possibly even get into a bidding war. In one corner, you have the team that you've been playing with for your entire career. Keep in mind that this team is not very good, is kind of dysfunctional, is undergoing a coaching change, and has only made the playoffs once in the 7 years that you've been there. In the other corner, you have another team that is willing to pay a significant amount of money. We're talking a salary that would have exceeded what your original team was going to pay you by a lot. I'm not sure how many of you would pick the first option and take significantly less money to stay on a hometown discount. Well, in 1984, that's exactly what Green Bay Packers quarterback David Whitehurst did. And it turned out to be a disaster. Not only did this move wind up costing him financially, but this move wound up ending his professional career entirely. Of the two options that he was presented with, he not only chose the worst possible option, but chose an option where everything that could have gone wrong did. This was an incredibly costly mistake in more ways than one. And this is the story behind the costliest mistake by a quarterback in Packers history. Before I talk about the situation in question, we need some context to understand the player, how good he was, and why he was torn with regards to what he wanted to do with the next stage in his career. Our story begins in 1977, when the Green Bay Packers drafted a quarterback out of Furman in the 8th round of the NFL draft by the name of David Whitehurst. If you're wondering, yes, he is the father of eventual NFL quarterback Charlie Whitehurst. When the Packers drafted him, I'm not sure how much they realistically expected out of the signal caller, especially considering the fact that of the 28 8th round picks the previous year, 13 of them, or roughly half, failed to play a single snap in the NFL. The 8th round was somewhat of a crapshoot in that regard. However, Whitehurst actually lasted a pretty long time with the Packers and in the league, considering the circumstances. He was supposed to be fighting for a backup spot with Lynn Dickey as the starter, and was supposed to probably never play again for the Packers after they wasted their first round pick in the 1981 NFL Draft on Rich Campbell, who arguably went down as the biggest draft bust in the history of the franchise. But Whitehurst was able to stay with the Packers for 7 seasons, which is a heck of a career for an 8th round pick. Bart Starr liked him enough to either start him if Dickey couldn't go, or to put him in as the backup if Dickey got hurt, or if Dickey was having a rough game and needed to be benched. And there were some highlights in there as well. In 1978, Whitehurst went 8-7-1 as the team's starting quarterback, starting all 16 games as the team finished with a winning record for the first time since 1972, when they won the NFC Central with a 10-4 record. He had an unbelievable 4-touchdown game against the New Orleans Saints in the home opener that year, where he threw 4 touchdown passes and had a passer rating of 141.9 in a winning effort. And he had a 1981 game against the Seahawks where, in a winning effort, he threw 3 touchdown passes in the first half. Now, was he a very good quarterback? No, not really. His play style was very reminiscent to that of Chad Henne. You get a whole lot of checkdowns, you get some sacks where he'd hold onto the ball for far too long, and you get some pretty bad interceptions. But especially for the era, he was a serviceable backup quarterback. You could do better for your number 2 guy, but you could also do a heck of a lot worse. He was pretty middle of the road. And in 1983, after his 7th season with the Packers ended, he had a really big decision to make. In 1983, there was this upstart football league that launched called the United States Football League. You may have heard of it. And during the first season of the USFL, they were willing to spend money and throw cash at players to get them to jump ship and join the rival league. Some monumental names were playing in the USFL, especially at the quarterback position. Entering the 1984 season, you were going to see Jim Kelly, a first-round pick by the Buffalo Bills in the 1983 NFL Draft, play in the league. You were going to see Brian Sipe, the MVP of the NFL just a few years before in 1980, play in the league. You were going to see Doug Williams, the acclaimed Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback and former first-round pick, play in the league. The list goes on and on. Especially when it came to the quarterback position, which is the most important position on any team, the USFL was willing to dish out whatever it took. If you were a capable signal caller, you were getting paid. To put into perspective how much teams were willing to pay, when Lynn Dickey was thinking of leaving the Packers to join the upstart league, Green Bay changed his contract from $350,000 per year to $600,000 per year. Mark Wilson, the quarterback of the Los Angeles Raiders, got a salary raise from $200,000 per year to anywhere from $700,000 to $1 million. And it was clear that Whitehurst was going to be one of those quarterbacks who had the opportunity to get involved in a bidding war with the USFL, and potentially leave the Packers for more money and for a legitimate chance to be a starter, since Whitehurst hadn't started a game since 1981 at this point. There were some signs in the organization that Whitehurst, outside of money, was seriously considering leaving the team in 1984 to negotiate a contract with the USFL. Back in 1982, before the USFL had even played a snap yet, and before we even knew who was playing for each team, Whitehurst talked about the NFL being on strike, and mentioned how playing in the USFL would be an attractive option, especially if the NFL wound up canceling the entire 1982 season, which did not happen. As Whitehurst said quite bluntly, there would be a lot of people who would be interested in going to the USFL. And in retrospect, Whitehurst wrote that the atmosphere with Green Bay was not what it used to be compared to when he got there in 1977. He said from a player standpoint, the atmosphere was not as good. The situation in Green Bay changed. And when the 1983 season ended, Whitehurst was at a crossroads. At this point, Whitehurst had two options. Option one was to re-sign with the Packers and stay where he had stayed his whole career. While he'd get to stay in the NFL, which is something that he wanted, he wouldn't be the starting quarterback. He'd probably be making way less money compared to the USFL. The odds were slim that the Packers would be willing to break the bank to bring Whitehurst back, especially since they had Dickey and the last fledgling hope that Campbell could be something. And there was a coaching change. Whereas Bart Starr liked Whitehurst enough to keep him around for 7 seasons, after he lost his job following the end of the 1983 season, Starr was no longer there, and Forrest Gregg became the head coach of the Packers. While some things would be the same, as Bob Schnelker was still the offensive coordinator, a new head coach can change everything in terms of the environment and who makes the roster. As a side note, to learn more about Forrest Gregg, click the card in the upper right corner. Option 2 was to go to the USFL and to join the Upstart League, where he would make more money and have more opportunities to be a starter. It somewhat seemed like a no-brainer, right? Join the USFL, get that playing time, and get that money. But there was something about staying in Green Bay and staying in the NFL. He was making good money already in the NFL at $150,000 per year, and even though there was that dysfunction that Whitehurst harped on after his playing days were done, he really liked playing in Green Bay. For Whitehurst, the prestige of the NFL seemed to be more important than the money and the shininess of the USFL. As his agent, Randy Hendricks, said, "The Packers have been nice to us. They haven't been insulting to us. But if they want to keep David, we expect them to pay reasonably well." It helped that Whitehurst was a Packers fan growing up down in Atlanta, and idolized Bart Starr growing up. So that had to be special to not only play for his childhood team, but to have played for his idol for 7 years. It also helped that Hendricks was not big on players jumping from the NFL to the USFL, and while he had no problem using the USFL as leverage for new contracts, he didn't want his players to jump to the other league unless it was a last resort option. The message was clear. As long as Whitehurst got a fair salary, he would come back to the Packers. Sure enough, while the terms of the contract were not disclosed, that's exactly what happened. Whitehurst was going to come back to the frozen tundra at Lambeau Field for the 8th straight season. Little did Whitehurst know that signing this contract, when all was said and done, would be the costliest mistake that any Packers quarterback ever made. Before going any further, this is not like the Jim Grabowski situation that I talked about a while ago, where Grabowski intended on negotiating a contract with Vince Lombardi, and instead of negotiating, he accidentally took the first offer, not realizing until after the fact that he had signed a contract. You can learn more about that bizarre situation, as well as the incredible psychology of Lombardi, by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Whitehurst knew exactly what he was doing when he signed the contract. Again, the terms were not disclosed, but it was a 2-year deal that would keep Whitehurst locked up in Green Bay until 1985. And Whitehurst seemed to be thrilled about re-signing with the Packers, saying sentimentally, "My heart is with the Packers. That's where I wanted to be. At this stage in my career, I wanted to stay in the NFL." Whitehurst admitted that he was seriously considering the USFL, but eventually realized that he wanted to stay in Green Bay and didn't want to hop leagues. The good news was that he was coming back for the 1984 season. The bad news? As mentioned before, the Packers had a brand new coach in Forrest Gregg. Gregg was also the general manager of the team and spent a 6th-round pick that year on Wisconsin quarterback Randy Wright. Gregg liked Wright enough to not only keep him on the roster, but to make him the backup quarterback, which demoted Whitehurst down on the depth chart. Now it was a battle between Whitehurst and Rich Campbell for the 3rd-string job. When Starr was there, he liked Whitehurst more than Campbell, much to the dismay of Campbell, who was perplexed after losing the backup job in 1983, saying, "I'm upset. I think I'm at least as good as David. I know what I can do." He even went as far as requesting a trade. But again, this was a different head coach. And even though Starr liked Whitehurst more, and even though offensive coordinator Bob Schnelker liked Whitehurst more, as he flat out admitted that Campbell couldn't throw a football, Gregg felt differently. And when the final cuts were made, the Packers kept 3 quarterbacks: Lynn Dickey, Randy Wright, and Rich Campbell. David Whitehurst did not make the final cut. He was now a free agent. After all of that, after spurring the USFL and a potential big payday to play and start just to stay in Green Bay as a backup, his loyalty and his decision gets rewarded by being released and being out of a job. And unfortunately for Whitehurst, he would never play another down in professional football again. Whitehurst would land on his feet pretty quickly in terms of finding employment, as a few days after getting cut, he was signed by the Kansas City Chiefs to be their third-string quarterback after Bill Kenny was placed on IR. However, there's a reason that you aren't seeing any clips of Whitehurst playing with the Chiefs, and that's because he never played a single down in that uniform. Once Kenny came back from his injury, Whitehurst was promptly released, and never played again. It was too late to join the USFL, as the 1984 season had come and gone. And instead of trying to play again in 1985, whether it was in the NFL or the USFL, he retired for good and entered the business of building homes. Schnelker summed up the career of Whitehurst the best. As he said, "I like Dave. He was a good backup. He didn't have much at all as far as talent. He was okay." In other words, Whitehurst was your typical backup quarterback. And with backup quarterbacks like that, some, like Mike Lennon and Chase Daniel, became experts at finding the perfect destination to get the bag and get as much money as possible. And then there are others like David Whitehurst, who have to wonder what if. Whitehurst holds no animosity towards the Packers, and doesn't seem to have any regrets about the situation. He has routinely praised the Packers for being a class organization, and has always mentioned how grateful he was to play in Green Bay. But you have to wonder if he's upset about how things played out with his career ending. It was an anticlimactic end to a decent career, especially for an 8th round pick that wasn't expected to do much of anything at the next level. He could have played in the USFL, made more money than he was making in the NFL, and got him more playing time. And if he succeeded there, maybe he had a shot at extending his career a few more years, whether it would have been a return to Green Bay or somewhere else. Instead, he chose loyalty to his favorite team over joining another league, and this noble decision wound up ending his entire career. It's tough to have a much costlier mistake than that. Get your official Jaguar Gamer 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.